So good evening, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Alan, and I am the manager of the Northern Ireland War Memorial. And I will be speaking tonight on my research into the victims of the Belfast Blitz, on what is actually the anniversary of the fire raid Blitz, that occurred on the night of the 4th and 5th of May in 1941. So a little bit of housekeeping first before we begin. The talk is being recorded as well as being live streamed onto Facebook Live. So if you're a private person, you don't want your face being out there across the internet, make sure you switch your camera off. Also just keep your mics muted as well, just to limit any disturbances. I am also in the office by myself at the minute, so the lights are on a timer. So if the lights go out, I promise you I'm still here, okay? Should hopefully still be able to hear me, okay? As well as that, then, if any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them at the end. If you want to put them in the little chat box at the bottom, or if you use your reaction button and hit, and I can come to you at the end and invite you on, and you can ask it in person then instead. Also, just quickly, I want to apologize that I am using notes tonight. Just so many details of people's names and small details about individual people. It's just impossible for me to remember them all without notes. So please forgive me. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit initially about the War Memorial and how we're associated with the Blitz, what we do surrounding the Blitz. I'll then put the question forward about what is a Blitz victim, or who is a Blitz victim rather, before going into some of the victims of the air raids in detail. So I know there are some relatives of victims of the air raids on tonight as well. And it's really good to see you here. You've been incredibly helpful over a number of years in my research. And it simply wouldn't have been possible to do this or present this research without your assistance over the years. So I sincerely want to thank you all. But I also want to apologize because it's impossible for me to cover all the victims of the air raids in this talk. There were just under 1,000 of them. So this is only a selection of those victims. And again, it's only a snippet of my research. But again, it's just simply will not have been possible without your assistance over the years. Many of you who have actually provided and donated the documents and our photographs to the Northern Ireland War Memorial. And many of those have never actually ever before been seen outside the wider family circle. So it is almost as a privilege to hold them within the museum's collection. Before I move on, I just want to name some of those people that are shown on the title slide here, because some of them don't actually feature in the talk. So up at the very top, we have young brothers Reginald and Sidney Guy, who were killed at Percy Street during the Easter Tuesday raid. Here on the left, we have Corporal John Mason, who was killed at Victoria Barracks during the 9th Battalion East Surrey Regiment, I should add. He was killed on the 5th of May at Victoria Barracks. In the centre, we have William McGowan, who was killed on the last raid on the 5th, 6th of May, 1941, at his home in East Belfast on Avondale Street. We have Major Edward Himmler, who was killed at Campbell College on the fire raid, the 4th and 5th of May. We have Reverend Thomas Bill, who died in Antrim Road during the Tuesday raid. And again, down to the very bottom, we have the Haney family, who were killed at the Percy Street shelter during the Easter Tuesday raid. So a little bit about the War Memorial. So the War Memorial is very much was very much born out of the Belfast Blitz. The image shown here on the left-hand side is the junction of High Street and Bridge Street just after the Belfast Blitz in Belfast City Centre. And that area that was destroyed in the Blitz became known as Blitz Square, and it was used for multiple purposes during the war. There's a car park, there was gospel tents, Barry's amusements were even set up there. But it also became home to the Northern Ireland War Memorial Building Fund. In the picture on the right-hand side here, you can see 3 converted tram cars which housed that building fund. And then at the back end, or the back of that Blitz Square, the Waring Street side, is where the Belfast Corporation gifted a plot of land to the building fund to build their building. And that opened in October 1963. Since then, we have moved. We moved premises to a much more modern building on Talbot Street, where we are currently located in around 2007. And we the Blitz is a major part of what we do. It's a major story of what we tell. It features prominently within our gallery. It features prominently within our events, certainly around this time of year. And we do hold a Blitz Memorial within our collection, and it's on permanent display as part of the museum. And it's called Blitz Survivors, or the Blitz Memorial by Carolyn Mulholland. And it symbolizes the chaos and the destruction of the event, along with you notice there's positive and negative spaces. So the positive and negative spaces, I mean, there's gaps and there's silhouettes of people, and that's to symbolize the people that were lost during the Blitz. But there's also the spaces that we filled in, the positive shapes, and they are to symbolize the feeling of loss that was felt by the people that were left behind. So you see some small details. There's, for example, here in the middle, there's a child left of lost a parent, and vice versa. Then there's a parent here who's lost the negative space inside of a child who they have lost as a result of the Blitz. On display within the museum is also, this might take a little second to load this one, is a scrolling list of all those people who are known to have been killed as a result of enemy action in April and May 1941. And I'm just going to let this roll on for a bit. It won't run out. It goes on, I think it goes on for about 25-30 minutes. But it's alphabetical. You see on it the date of death, the age of the person, and their last known address as well. The families are all grouped together, as well as sometimes the military rank will be on it as well. But I'm going to leave it running for a bit, just while I talk about a little bit about the Belfast Blitz and how the question about who is a Belfast, or who is a Blitz victim, because it may sound like a simple question, but it can be a little bit more complicated than what you might think. So, for example, initially there's a footnote in Blake's official war history. So Northern Ireland and the Second World War. It was published after the war. And that quote, it's a footnote, it's not even a full sentence, it's a footnote at the bottom of the page that reads, apart from London, the only other city to experience up to this time a comparable loss of life was Glasgow on the 2 consecutive nights of March 13th to March 15th. Afterwards, Liverpool suffered 1,453 fatal casualties during the week of the 1st to the 8th of May, and it was estimated that roughly half of these occurred on the 3rd and 4th of May 1941. So this quote is all too often taken out of context. You will see it misquoted all the time. You see it online and you see it in the media. Something along the lines of Belfast suffered more than any other UK city except for London, or Belfast had the highest number of casualties in a single raid. And it's simply not true. It's taken totally out of context. So, and this is a bit symbolic of a shift in the narrative surrounding the Blitz. So it's a move away from, first of all, away from the Belfast Blitz as part of the wider UK-wide Blitz. It's taken the Belfast Blitz out of the context of the wider war, particularly the Blitz between 1940 and 1941. But it also takes away from what is a very human story, a very human element of the Belfast Blitz. So those killed in the Blitz are presented as a stat. You see these presented as 900 killed in one night, or over 1,000 people were killed, and it's used as a stat or as a figure to reinforce this narrative that Northern Ireland did its part. We did its part. Look how many people died because we did our part. And it's very similar. It almost harks back a little bit to this idea from the First World War. This idea of a blood sacrifice that was sort of put forward after the Easter Rising in Dublin in 1916, as well as then the Battle of the Somme as well. It's simply not true. It doesn't happen. So over time, this number of people that have been killed has been overinflated. It's been overestimated. As I said, popular examples include 900 people killed on Easter Tuesday, or over 1,000 killed altogether. And in total, less than 1,000 people were killed. Across the 4 raids, 987 people are known to have died as a consequence of enemy action in April and May 1941. And it's worth to point out, it's not just in Belfast either. 13 people are on the Easter Tuesday raid on the 15th, 16th April. 13 people, or 13 soldiers, I should say, were killed at Ards Airfield. 5 civilians were killed in Bangor, and 13 civilians were killed in Derry as well. But who is a victim of the Belfast Blitz? How do you decide who the victim of the Belfast Blitz? There were 2 main original sources. The first one was those published by the Ministry of Home Security, which they took their figures from the Ministry of Public Security, which was the Northern Irish government department. And then you have the Register General Office, or the RGO for short. And of course, these two bodies had two figures, two different figures for people who died. Writing in 1947, Dr. Chart, who was a one-time deputy keeper of records at the Public Record Office in Northern Ireland, he was asked to write a summary of the war, or Northern Irish war effort, for the Ulster Yearbook in 1947. And he believed that the RGO figures were much more reliable. And these RGO figures, they're still held by the Public Record Office. So they are the death certificates that were completed at the time. So they were completed just during the raids. So they were completed on the night of 17th of April, 15th, 16th of April, 4th, 5th, and 5th, 6th of May, or as and when bodies were found. So these are when the bodies have been taken to the mortuary or the morgue or the casualty clearance station, and the details have been filled in as to what the person looks like, where they were found, time they were found at, what injuries they might have, what was in their pockets, what they're wearing. And I have been very fortunate in the sense that I have been granted access to view these files, and they've been incredibly detailed to the point that they're still closed to the public, and we're granted access to them. But they have been proved very useful in confirming, for example, the number of military casualties that were associated with the Belfast Blitz. Of course, though, the main public source was, and still is, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. So it was originally published in 1954. You see it down here at the bottom. This is a very old and tattered physical copy that we have in the museum when it was called the Imperial War Graves Commission. But of course, its much more modern form is on the Commonwealth War Graves website. So that's what it looks like here. And the way that worked is that the local authority, so the local council essentially, was the reporting authority, and they reported the people that died within their area or their borough to the Commonwealth War Graves and Imperial War Graves Commission. So you see you have Londonderry Rural District, you have Bangor Borough, you have Belfast Rural District, and you have the Belfast County Borough. Now, of course, these figures don't just relate to the Belfast Blitz, they relate for the whole period of the war. So you'll have people in here, you'll have people who are maybe killed, home guard people, or home guards volunteers who were killed at a roadblock when they were knocked down by a lorry, things like that. So it's not specifically just on the Belfast Blitz, but people obviously slip through the net. It's so hard to comprehend the chaos and the confusion surrounding things, surrounding the time, and even the level of bureaucracy as well. There's a quote I've read before about how the Second World War was the first bureaucratic war, and things get lost. People slip through the net, and without legal documentation, it's actually can be very difficult to say for certain with 100% accuracy that someone's death has been linked to the Blitz. And there are a number of examples, and I'm going to rhyme off here very quickly, that are linked to the Blitz, and each one of them has their own individual circumstance as well. For example, then the Monday after the Easter Tuesday raid, so the Monday, the 20th of April, there was a woman who committed suicide in Bangor. She threw herself into the sea at Bangor. She was, the week before, she had previously been a resident of Belfast, but it is recorded that she had only been living in Bangor from the previous Wednesday, i.e. the day after the Easter Tuesday raid. So she, for all intents and purposes, is not associated with the Blitz. It doesn't look, but when you read through the lines, she was only living in Bangor. She was more than likely, she was part of the mass crash evacuation to outlying towns from Belfast for safety. And it obviously, we use a modern term, you have the PTSD, and she was in an unsound state of mind, is what the report is, and she killed herself. Again, is she a victim of the Belfast Blitz? It's impossible to say. There is another example of a man named William Campbell. Again, unfortunately, another suicide. He killed himself in June 1941. On his death registration and in the inquest into his death, it records that it was directly due to his experiences in the area. So here we have the opposite of Florence Dixon, who threw herself into the sea, where the official legal line is that it was directly linked to the Belfast Blitz, and because of his experiences with the Blitz, and he has an unsound state of mind, and he killed himself. Pictured here is Oblate Father James Hughes. Oblate Father James Hughes, or Father Hughes, was actually from Dublin. He was up visiting his sister, who lived off the Antrim Road in North Belfast over the Easter holidays. And he died of a heart attack that was brought on by the air raids on Easter Tuesday. It doesn't appear in the Commonwealth War Graves list. It doesn't have a Northern Irish death registration. Only documentations about him is a little footnote at the end of a column reporting about evacuees getting a train to Dublin. And when there's a little footnote that says something along the lines of the saddest sight was the repatriation of the body of Father Hughes off the train for burial. Whereas if you were to speak with family and even the Oblate fathers, they're very much of the opinion that he died as a consequence of the Belfast Blitz. If he was in Dublin over Easter period, would he have had a heart attack? There was another young lady killed after the direct involvement of the Belfast Blitz. So she was employed as a waitress on a cafe on Fountain Street, and the building next door was damaged in the Blitz, to the point where its top 2 floors were being taken down for safety because they've been so badly damaged. And this rubble was all stacked up above an alleyway, and she was in the alleyway that was being used as a storeroom when this rubble collapsed on her, and she died as a result of her injuries, despite the best efforts of the rescue party.
And the I-94 uses.
So, again, is she a victim of the Belfast Blitz? If it wasn't for the Belfast Blitz, there wouldn't have been rubble above her head. It's impossible to say. Even more bizarrely, it goes well beyond the years of even the war years, I should say. Much later, well into the late 50s, there is a young boy who was killed, and this boy is so young that he wasn't even alive at the time of the Belfast Blitz, and he was playing in a bombed building. He was playing in a Blitz building when part of that building collapsed, and he died again as a result of his injuries. So back then, there was also two other men who were killed. There was Sergeant Arthur Walter Edward Bolden and Corporal Harold Edwin Burton of number 19 bomb disposal, who were killed by gas poisoning whilst attempting to defuse an unexploded bomb in a crater left behind after the Blitz. So it's just food for thought that it's not as simple as following a list that's been previously published. It's a very nuanced bit of research, but I really want to stress that the main point is that these are all people. These people these are not a number. They're not part of 1,000. They're not part of 999. These people all had lives. They all had relationships. They all had careers. Many were civilians. So the vast majority of people killed in the Belfast Blitz, 9/10 of them were civilians. And these were not active participants in the war. They were killed in their beds. They were killed in their coal holes. They were killed in the perceived safety of air raid shelters on the streets. So when they're being presented as a stat or as a number, as part of it dehumanizes them. You're forgetting who these people were and that human cost, not that loss of life of the Belfast Blitz. And that the narrative of the Blitz has very much moved away from this human element. It's very much about why Belfast was bombed or what Belfast did. Belfast was bombed because of its war output, and that's something that I'm working towards drawing attention to and trying to address. But we'll move on and we'll get into a bit more detail. And we'll do this chronologically. I'll work through the different air raids. So beginning with the Dockside raid, which is the first air raid on the 8th of April, 1941. Now, it shouldn't have really came as a shock to many people in Northern Ireland that Belfast was bombed. Air raid signs have gone off intermittently. Luftwaffe planes have been overhead as well. And these are real warnings. They weren't false alarms. But the first real raid, the first time bombs were dropped on Belfast was on the night of the 7th of April, 1941. And the main force of bombers, of the Luftwaffe bombers, were over England and Scotland. But due to poor weather, cloud cover, about an estimated 6 planes proceeded to Belfast as their secondary target. And this raid, as the name suggests, this raid was very much localized to the docks. So you have the area around Duncrew Street, Pollock Dock, and Harlan Wolff were badly affected by this. And this is largely where this loss of life occurred. It said there's 15 victims on this night, and they're all listed on the screen here. And you notice they're all men. So the first victims of the Belfast Blitz were Bryce Harkness and Archibald or Archie Mcdonald. Now, in the middle of this photo is Archie Mcdonald. They were both auxiliary firemen, and Archie Mcdonald was only 22 years old. In the middle here is Archie Mcdonald as a teenager, surrounded by his family. He's pictured alongside an auxiliary fire service helmet from the museum collection. And they died when they mistook a parachute mine for a German parachutist. So they seen this parachute coming down, and they ran towards it thinking they were going to apprehend this German who's parachuting out of the sky. And sadly, it was too late. They realized their mistake, that it wasn't a person, it was a bomb, and they were killed in the subsequent explosion. Another victim of this raid was the gentleman pictured here with his wife and his daughter. And this man was called Thomas Savage. Now, Thomas was a recently retired reporter with the newsletter, and he actually reported under the pseudonym of Lynx. So he reported on junior football, I assume occurred around Belfast. So he was injured at Horn the Wolf on the night of the Dockside raid when he's undertaking fire watching duties, and he eventually succumbed to his injuries months later on the 20th of June, 1941. A few weeks later, however, or about a week later, I should say, the Luftwaffe returned in force. So about 200 German planes attacked Belfast, and the area outlined in this map, again from the War Memorial collection, a little bit around the lower Newtownards Road in East Belfast, but the area that bore the brunt was the area of Shore Road, Antrim Road, Cahill Road of North Belfast. And it really bore the brunt of this attack. And there's lots of theories as to why this is, but that's not what this talks about. This talk is about the people that are affected. This raid was the largest loss of life for one raid, or for the Belfast Blitz. So there were over 700 people killed altogether in Easter Tuesday in 1941 across Northern Ireland. So that includes Londonderry, Newtownards, and those killed in Bangor as well. But when you take away the civilian, or take away the military figures, it leaves less than 700 civilians killed one night. And that's a far cry from the figure of 900 that's thrown about sometimes in the media and online, when people really try and talk about this narrative about single loss of life. It's over 200 people less than what they're trying to big up. So, as I said, on the area of the York Road, this vacant site stood the York Road Police Station, or the RUC barracks. And it was recorded that during the Easter Tuesday raid that an officer opened the door during the raid to look out, and just at that very moment, a parachute mine landed on the street outside the station. From his training, he knew that he had approximately 20 seconds to evacuate the building and get as far away as possible. But unfortunately, not everyone got out. Constable James Meeklam and Special Constable Jackie McComb were killed in the subsequent explosion. But next to the station lived the Barr family. And pictured left to right are husband and wife, James and Jeannie Barr, and their son, William. William actually survived the blast initially. He was pulled out of the rubble alive. He was buried alive in the rubble, but he succumbed to his wounds that night after he was rescued. Now, this family, they're buried together at Connor New Cemetery in Kells. But if you all look very closely at this headstone, you'll notice there is another name on the headstone. You'll see there's their daughter as well, Bessie, or Elizabeth. She's known as Bessie. Bessie was also killed by enemy action during the Easter Tuesday air raid. Aside from newspapers, no documentary evidence exists for the death of Bessie Barr. She doesn't appear on the Commonwealth War Graves list. She doesn't have a death certificate. There's no inquest into her disappearance or her death. She doesn't exist apart from on this headstone and in a newspaper. So although her name appears in this headstone, she has no known grave, and it is assumed that then her body was never identified or it was never recovered following the Easter Tuesday raid. Also on the headstone, you'll see is another daughter of James and Jeannie. Her name again is also Jeannie. So she married Samuel McDowell. So she became Jeannie McDowell. But the family, so through this research, I've been in touch with the family. And when Jeannie arrived at the LMS station, New York Road, after the Easter Tuesday raid, she was told the news of the bomb, of the parachute mine, and the death of her family, her mother, father, and her brother and sister. And she collapsed in shock, and she was effectively bedridden for the rest of her life until her death in 1985. So as much as we talk about this where people, the victims of the Blitz talked about people who died, there's also a lasting legacy, and it goes back to Carolyn Mulholland's Blitz Memorial statue about the loss of life, or the sense of loss and the effect that this would have had on people who remained as well. So 2.5 weeks ago, on the 16th of April this year, on the 81st anniversary of the Easter Tuesday raid, we were joined by the great nephew of Bessie Barr, Alistair, who laid a wreath on the mass grave in Belfast City Cemetery in her memory, because it is assumed then that she is one of the, I think it's 197 coffins that are buried in this plot, or that were originally buried in that plot at Belfast City Cemetery. Again, I just want to take this moment then to highlight that tomorrow we are actually going to be holding another short ceremony to mark the anniversary of the fire raid, and this time it'll be held at Milton Cemetery, where there is also a mass grave. And there we will be joined by a Blitz survivor, whose father, pictured here, Rifleman William McGinnity of the 70th Battalion, the Royal Ulster Rifles, and her mother Bridget, pictured in the middle, and then her siblings Robert and Margaret, and they were all killed at their home in Holmdene Gardens. So you have William on the left, you have her mother Bridget in the middle, her little sister Margaret, known as Rita, was only 3 years old, and her younger brother Robert was only 16 months at the time of his death. And here on the right hand side we have Annie, who will be joining us tomorrow as a young girl. So this ceremony is open to the public, I might add, and it would be great to see as many of you as possible. It's an open invitation. If you don't know where to go, please feel free to get in touch. Or Gemma, who's online tonight, might be able to put, if you put your email address in there, Gemma, people might be able to email if they want to come along. But it'd be great to see as many of you there as possible to come along and pay your respects. And we'll be joined by Piper from Campbell College as well. And the reasons that will become clear later on. So Rifleman McGinnity was actually based at Victoria Barracks, but because he was a married man, he was allowed a home pass. He's allowed to stay with his family during the Blitz. But Victoria Barracks was also heavily bombed during both major raids of the Belfast Blitz. And despite reports that approximately 30 ATS, or Auxiliary Territorial Service volunteers, were killed at Victoria Barracks, there is only evidence to suggest that there was one single ATS volunteer killed UK-wide on the date of the 15th, 16th of April, 1941. And that volunteer was Betty Burley, and she is pictured here on the left. And in the centre then is her grave at Gloucester Churchyard in County Fermanagh. She was aged 21. She was an ambulance driver with the ATS, and according to her family, her remains, all that was recovered from her, off her, I should say, they were into a shoebox-sized container, and that is all that was buried in this grave. She was the only female military victim of the Belfast Blitz. Now, across the city, at 20 Evelyn Gardens, just off the Cavehill Road, lived the Denby family. The head of that family was a man named William. William Denby was a celebrated motor vehicle builder whose company built black Minerva. One picture if you lost your social security is actually on display at the Ulster Transport Museum, and the reason why it's there is because it carried Churchill to Celtic Park for his famous Home Rule speech back in 1912. This is a letter sent by one of his daughters, Dorothy, or Dot, to her sister Mabel. And you see it's dated the 30th of March, 1941, i.e. just a week or a couple of weeks before the Easter Tuesday air raid. And it might be a bit blocked because of the little toolbar here on Zoom, but you see at the very top hand corner up here, it says, P.S. Did you know that Anna and Billy are actually coming home for Easter? And signed D for Dorothy. So Anna, she's referring to, was another sister, and Anna had married a man named Billy Burdett, and together they worked for Bernardo's home near Liverpool. So they were coming home for the Easter holidays, and they had a daughter named Dorothy. Now, I know it's not pictured as well, but this letter, it actually finished. Dorothy actually signs this letter with "Best love to all. Keep out of the way of bombs, blasts, and splinters, and don't forget your gas mask." Unfortunately, a bit of a premonition in terms for the Denby family, because 20 Evelyn Gardens was hit during the Easter Tuesday air raid, and Anna's parents, William, who's pictured on the right-hand side here, the owner of the motor vehicle building, her mother, Harriet, who's pictured in the center sitting down, her two sisters, Isa and Dorothy, and her daughter, Dorothy, were all killed as a result. Now, Dorothy was known as, her full name was Dorothy Kathleen Burdett, or DKB for short, and the sisters, and a number of other letters, affectionately called her DKB, and they can really see it's a real term of endearment. But Anna and Billy, DKB's parents, they survived because when the family were all sheltering together, there wasn't enough room for Anna and Billy to shelter with them. So they were sheltering elsewhere in the house, and they were pulled from the rubble alive. When they were found, the family were told that they were up to their necks in raw sewage amongst the rubble. Now, the family are buried together. Dorothy and her aunts and her grandparents are buried in Dundonald Cemetery. Later in the war, Anna and Billy moved back to England, where they ran their own Dr. Bernardo's orphanage. And at some point during the war, they met writer, nurse, pacifist Vera Britton. And Vera Britton wrote a short story for a fundraising drive for Manchester Children's Hospital. And that book was called Voices on the Green. And her contribution was entitled Mother. But on the inside of the cover of the picture copy that she gave to Anna Burdett was a handwritten note that says, "For Mr. and Mrs. Burdett, in honor of a memory of Vera Britton, Christmas 1945. So at some point, it's safe to say that Anna and Billy were speaking to Vera Britton and telling the story and telling her about DKB. And the story goes on, the story of Mother is about loss. It's about the loss of a child. And it goes on, so the story is very obviously is written in honor of Dorothy Kathleen Burdett, who was only 12 years old at the time of her death during the Easter Tuesday air raid. Further out from the city, towards Greencastle, pictured is Verran Gardens, just off the Whitewell Road. A parachute mine landed and killed 35 people. And the picture you can see here, Belfast Telegraph picture, you can see the level of destruction and damage that has been caused. Now in this blast, of these 35 people, included the Powers, the Power family, and this included Patrick Power, the father, up in the top left-hand corner, and his children who lived at number 38, Verran Gardens. Beside him, over here, is 8-year-old Thomas. Below that is his sister, 12-year-old Bridget, and beside her is 8-year-old Gerald. And these pictures are actually, these are tiny little thumbnail pictures. They're actually all that survive off their mass cards. On the same street, of these 35 people, lived Daniel McKay, who is pictured on the left-hand side. He's the man standing up here. And he lived at number 49 with his wife, Jean, and his son, who was also called Daniel. And they were also killed. They were also killed along with his sister-in-law. So his Jean's sister, his wife's Jean's sister. She is called May Doherty, and she is pictured here on the right-hand side. This is May Doherty. And her daughters, Sue and Mary, who are pictured standing in this photograph, also lost their lives during the Easter Tuesday raid when that parachute mine landed in Vernon Gardens. Her husband, called Hugh, who's pictured here in a Royal Navy uniform, actually survived, and you can see the sensor mark on his cap as well. He survived because he was at sea at the time. He was actually in America. I believe he's in Norfolk, Virginia, off the top of my head. But in the photograph, he is holding his son, who's also called Hugh. And after the Blitz, after the bomb fell, Hugh actually survived. The little boy, Hugh, survived. He was 2.5 years old, was pulled from rubble, and he was found sitting on, I believe he's found sitting on a sofa in the Mater Hospital in the days after Easter. And an appeal was put out across in the Belfast Telegraph to identify this boy called Hugh. And the story goes that, as you see, it's reported here, and you can see the similarities. But his name was Hugh, but he told everybody he was called Billy. And he told everybody that his father wore a tin hat and that he sailed on a big ship, and that's all he had to go on. But we were very fortunate over the last number of years to actually make contact with Hugh. I believe he now lives in Australia, as well as Hugh's cousin. And because although Hugh was then too young to obviously recall his disappearance as such, his cousin was Maureen was able to recall what happened and how they found him, because they've seen the appeal in the newspapers. They were going around the morgues and the hospitals trying to identify the bodies of their of Hugh's parents, or Hugh's mother and his sisters, when they found him and he called their name out. But we were very fortunate to interview them both as part of our ongoing oral history project, and their stories are held in the Northern Ireland War Memorial collection. Pictured here, again, two more Belfast Telegraph pictures of the same site, just slightly different angle. As the big mound of rubble in the middle was number 213 Antrim Road, that was known as the Gloucester Villa. The street in behind, I believe it's called, is Hillman Street. So the street from the point of view is on the Antrim Road. And again here, a parachute mine landed. And actually in the photograph on the right hand side, you can see the remnants of the parachute hanging off the tram wires. So this house belonged to an Irina Redmond, who's originally from Tataran in County Armagh, and it moved to Canada, Newfoundland, I should say, before moving back to Northern Ireland. But fortunately, she was not in the house at the time of the Blitz. She was recovering from appendicitis in the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast at the time of the air raids, and thus her life was saved. However, in the house was her daughter, Myrtle. Myrtle is pictured here in the centre, along with a number of her friends, and as well as her domestic maid, or domestic servant as well, Georgina Irvine. So Myrtle Redmond was killed. Georgina Irvine was killed here. Christopher Foe, who is pictured in the bottom left-hand corner on his wedding day, he worked for, I believe, the Ministry of Supply. He lost his life. Captain Ron Kingston is very, very happy, very cheeky looking chap up here in the left-hand corner. He lost his life. Raymond Orr was killed. Edward Warburton Phillips was killed. And over here, almost a very stereotypical looking RAF officer of the time, Flight Lieutenant Mark Hamilton Brooks was also killed. Flight Lieutenant Brooks was actually based at Newtownards Airfield with 231 Squadron, which coincidentally, as I already spoke about tonight, or already referred to tonight, was bombed during the Easter Tuesday air raid. A high explosive bomb hit one of the command huts of the battalion that was guarding the airfield on home defence duties, and it killed 13 soldiers. So that battalion was the 70th Battalion of the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers, and this battalion was actually, as I said, was a home defence battalion. So it was made up of young men, of some men 16, 17, 18 years old, and they were Fusilier William Bellamy, Fusilier Samuel Burke, who's pictured on the top right corner, Lance Corporal Alexander Carlisle, Lance Corporal Andrew Copling, Lance Corporal Hugh Emerson Fulton, who's pictured here on the left, Lance Corporal George Graham, Lance Corporal Daniel Higgins, who's on the bottom right, Lance Corporal Leslie Love, who's pictured in the centre, Company Quartermaster Sergeant Sam McFarland, who is pictured here in the bottom left-hand corner as a young boy, who's here on the right corner on his, I believe, was his mother's knee. Company Quartermaster Sergeant William McMurray, Ernest McNeil, Warrant Officer Alfred Penfold, and Warrant Officer Matthew Wright. Moving on to the fire raid. Again, the loss of life for the Easter Tuesday raid was massive, and it's just simply impossible for me to cover all people who were killed, even all areas that were killed. I do actually have images of some of the victims that were killed in Londonderry, and it's probably a little bit remiss of me not to have included them actually. But there was a loss of life, similar loss of life with Newtownards as there were in Derry, when a lone bomber actually dropped two parachute mines and killed a couple of families at an ex-service housing colony on the outskirts of Londonderry. But we'll move on to the fire raid that occurred essentially on this evening, 81 years ago, on the 5th of May, 1941. And this map was taken from the Public Records Office. You see the different areas overlapped of where the impact of the Blitz in different areas. So the bit shaded yellow, again around the docks, is for the dockside raid. You have the Easter Tuesday raid, April 15th, 16th, which is this red area, and the blue area is the fire raid. It's 4th, 5th of May. It's a little bit down here for the final raid on the 5th, 6th of May. So it's called the fire raid quite simply because 96,000 incendiaries were dropped on the city. And you see mostly on East Belfast, similar area to and overlap the North Belfast and the city centre. One of the worst losses of life at this time, or during this raid, was at Eglinton Street School, where 173 Company of the Royal Pioneer Corps were billeted. So these are pictures taken from the Imperial War Museum after the event, and you actually see the individual billets, the bunk beds on the right-hand side, with a pioneer surveying the damage. And there was a considerable loss of life at this school, to the point where there was actually a rumour that a plane had crashed at the site due to the amount of, because of all the heavy trucks they would have been using, the axes and wheels sticking out of the rubble. The pioneers, there's a rumour that a plane had crashed, but it was not true. It's just because of the trucks, the heavy trucks that they were using. Here, Private Thomas Henry Gibson, Second Lieutenant John Nelson Hamilton, Corporal Thomas Kane, Private James Osborne were killed, but many others were also injured, and they were taken to the nearest military hospital, which was based at Campbell College. And it was called the 24th London General Hospital over in East Belfast. And unbeknown to the people of the ambulance taking the Pioneer Corps to the hospital, that the hospital had actually been bombed as well on the same night. So again, these are Imperial War Museum photographs of the hospital. A lot of people would say that the school building was actually used as the hospital. Again, it's not true. It's not the way that military hospitals work. So the school building would have been used as the billets, or the officers' mess, more than likely, and the actual hospital would have been contained, the actual wards and the rooms, surgical theatres would have been contained in Nissen huts or Quonset huts in the school grounds. You see the damage caused amongst these huts in the school grounds in the other smaller photographs. But here there was a loss of life as well. Again, from Royal Army Service Corps, Royal Army Ordnance Corps, patients in the hospital were killed, along with then some of the pioneers that were brought from Eglinton Street School. Now, the loss of life here was quite substantial. It's upwards, I think, off the top of my head again, is close to 20 people, I believe. But some of those people include Major Edward Himmler, who we've always seen on the title slide. He's pictured here down the bottom left. He was from a very prominent military family from Liverpool. Quite a high-ranking soldier as well, to have been killed in the Belfast Blitz, holding the rank of Major. We have Private Stephen Henry Jones, who's pictured up here in the top left. We have Private Daniel Rhys Jones, In the bottom right-hand corner, we have Private Ivor John Rees. In the top right, we have Private Joseph Tobin, who's in the bottom centre, and we have Private Thomas Wattington in the top centre. The Thomas Wattington he was actually billeted down at Guildford, and he was actually in Belfast clearing up the damage and the rubble that was left as a result of the Easter Tuesday raid. So his unit had been moved from Guildford. I believe he's a raw engineer. He was brought. The only reason he was in Belfast was because of his role and because of the Easter Tuesday air raid. So there's a bit of a domino effect going on. Other casualties, or other fatal casualties, I should say, include Major Richard Fowler Ward, Major Hugh Emrys Bunnell, Private Herbert Montague Brooker, Private Montague James Burbage, Private Leonard Charles Christian, Private Eric Dennett, Private Herbert Gay, Corporal Leon Guglielmazzi, Lance Corporal John Thomas Harris, Private Felix Marassi, Private John McCunney, Private James Simon Moore, Lance Corporal Henry Norman Pickup, Staff Sergeant Norman Leslie Seward, Private Kenneth Leslie Shaw, and Sergeant Archibald Stewart. So it's a real significant loss of life between Eglinton Street School and Campbell College School in East Belfast. So Victoria Barracks was also hit. Again, Imperial War Museum pictures showing some of the damage. These were taken by a photographer named Bainbridge. We're again very pleased to say we have a number of his original photographs within our collection. The photographs are actually on display as part of a civil defence exhibition later in the war, and they still have their original mounts as well. But here, Corporal John William Oliver Mason lost his life. Now we've seen Corporal Mason at the beginning on the title slide as well. So he was pictured on his wedding day alongside his wife, and he belonged to 9th Battalion East Surrey Regiment. So on the 1st of May, so 4 days before, or 3 days before, I should say, the fire raid, he had actually wrote home to his wife, and it's a very sweet. We were again very fortunate the fact that it was donated by his family, by his relatives, to the Newtownards War Memorial collection, and it's a very private letter. It's a very sweet letter between two newlyweds. I don't particularly want to share it because I know the family are a bit reluctant as well about it, but it is very sweet and lots of very nice comments in it. She received that was sent the 1st of May 94, and inside it actually included a little stitched doll that he sent her. Unfortunately, however, the next bit of post that his wife received was the telegram from the War Office to state that I regret to report the death of number 6970398 Corporal Mason by enemy action on night of May 4th, 5th. Government will send deceased home if you, as wish, and if you cannot afford to yourself. So again, this telegram's 3 or 4 pages long. Again, part of the Northern Ireland collection. These twin islands, which would have been in behind the harbour power station, is no longer there. It's part of in Belfast Harbour. It's a part of the defences of Belfast Harbour. So it was partnered with Kilroot Fort on the County Antrim shore and with Grey Point Fort on the County Down shore. And this is a plan going back to in 1917 off the site. Now, during the Second World War, this is an anti-aircraft battery based here. So 175 battery of the 66th Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment were based here, and 3 men were actually killed as a consequence of a direct hit by a high explosive bomb on East Twin Island. They were Gunner John Brown, who is the very short man here actually on the right hand side, and Gunner Henry Corey, and Bombardier James Stringer. Now, James Stringer is pictured on the left hand side. Now, the family informed me that Bombardier Stringer wasn't meant to be on duty that night. He was maybe on leave, but he had agreed to cover for one of his comrades because he was actually attending the birth of his first child. So there's almost a very cruel twist of fate, in the sense that as to why James Stringer was located on the night of 4th, 5th of May at East Twin Island. Again, I'm getting very conscious of time, so I'm very aware and just rhyming off names too as well. But hopefully that this is sort of brought home that these aren't just a list of names, that it's not just a figure put out to say that this many people are killed in the Blitz. As I said, these people all had lives, there were stories behind their name. And hopefully this has helped illustrate through some of the pictures, there's faces behind it. It helps bring them a little bit back to life, I guess. Unfortunately, for the fire brigade, I've never been able to find civilian photos or any photos of civilians who died during the fire raid. But during the very final raid on the 5th and 6th of May 1941. Now this raid is usually in some commentators, some narratives, it's seen as an afterthought. Some people don't leave it out altogether, as in it's almost like it didn't happen. But in fact, more people actually died on this raid on the 5th, 6th of May 1941 than did on the Dockside raid on the 7th, 8th of April. And it's, again, as if you cast your minds right back to that Prony map I showed, it's very, very limited, very isolated attack. Again, maybe 1 or 2 planes dropped a couple of isolated bombs on an area of East Belfast around about Hollywood Arches. And the 2 people pictured here are husband and wife. On the left, you have Bertha McGowan. On the right-hand side, you have her husband, William McGowan, who died at their home at Avondale Street on that night. Now, they had a son. Their son was actually serving in the RAF at the time, and he didn't hear about his mother and father's death until he actually returned home on leave a few weeks later. And as he walked down, he turned the corner. The story goes, as he turned down the corner, he was greeted with this blank space, and the neighbours rushed out. And that was the first news he heard of the loss of his mother and father. Now, not to say that the hospital didn't try, because again, I have seen copies of the letter that, again, the Royal Victoria Hospital, where both Bertha and William were brought to, and they had written a letter of condolence. So they had written a letter to William about Bertha, and then coincidentally at the same time, they had written a letter to Bertha about William. And again, that just goes to show sort of the sense of confusion.
When you apply to USCIS, must be after an off day.
When people are trying to, when in the aftermath of the Blitz, and it's really hard to bring these things together. But I'm going to finish there because, again, there's not many people killed. I'm very conscious that, again, I just threw out a list of names, a list of photographs too, but I am more than happy to facilitate any discussion, answer any questions anybody might have. But before we do that, I just want to say that this is a thank you to everybody who's came on. This is actually the last in the series of our talks that we've held before our summer break, and that these are all available on our Facebook and will be available on our YouTube page as well. If any of you want to have a question or anything like that, now usually I'm the compere for these talks, so forgive me if I'm a little bit slow in getting to the comments and stuff myself. But if any doesn't want to ask me a question, feel free. My email's on the screen. You can follow us on any of the social media pages here as well, or you can give me a ring on the number on screen also. What I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But hopefully that has helped sort of reinforce the idea that this is a very human story to the Belfast Blitz. It's not just about supporting this narrative, it's very political narrative.
The feedback form, you can see.
But it's about the human cost, and it was these are real people that were killed, and over time it's been forgotten that these people lost their lives essentially. So again, I just see there's a couple of chat in the inbox here again. So yeah, there's Libby there who's saying about her dad's uncle and most of his family, her dad's uncle and most of his uncle's family were killed on Heather Street. Yes, there's a great loss of life on Heather Street and Easter Tuesday, and there was one survivor who passed away just a couple months ago. Oh, it's sad. It must have been a brave age. It must have been a very, very young at the time. Oh, you're still muted. Sorry, Libby.
Yeah, I've approached her family because I have pictures of them, and I have pictures of my dad's uncle. And I listened to these stories my whole life, and I had always wished he had written them down. But they're very private, and I feel like it's not my story to tell. I'm really sad that they can't be included, but she was dug out from under the staircase. My dad was the one sent in the morning to see how they were. And he said when he rounded the corner, everything had just been leveled. He told me it was a percussion bomb, but maybe that's what you referred to as a parachute bomb.
Parachute, yeah. So it's part, as it probably became apparent throughout the talk, the parachute bomb caused incredible loss of life throughout the Belfast Blitz. And it was actually, this is in 1941. But the British government never actually acknowledged their existence until much later on in the war. I believe it was possibly 1944. But these things are massive. They're huge bombs, and they were designed then to not penetrate the ground, so that the blast was amplified because it was sitting on top of the ground, and that's what caused the loss of life. Was this blast effect that then knocked down these rows of terrace houses. Again, so so this blast then was essentially a domino effect. It just knocked down the streets of houses at a time, and as you said, they were underneath the stairs, and that was the perceived strong point in a lot of houses.
So she was the only survivor, and they all went to Eden afterwards. There was a summer home there, and my dad said that Peggy just sat in the corner and didn't talk for days. And you probably, I mean, post-traumatic stress wasn't recognized in those days. But she never talked about her family. She just told people that they had died in the war, but didn't elaborate. So, and her children know nothing about it. The only information they have has come from me. So
it's a very sad thing, because the Blitz, as is just, you mentioned she's just passed away. The Blitz is just within living memory. It's not 150 years ago. It's only a generation or two ago. So as I said, we're joined tomorrow by Annie McGennity, who was Annie McGennity, who lost her mother, her father, and her siblings during the Blitz. So it still is within living memory, and these stories are important to capture and to tell. I do believe firmly that it is a narrative that needs to be rehumanized to an extent. But no, thank you very much, Libby.
I'll try and talk with them again to get in touch with you.
Thank you very much. I'd really appreciate that. Again, if anybody's any questions, if you want to raise your hand on the little reaction button, you're more than welcome to come on and answer again on the camera, or you feel free to type your in. Hi, Lindsay. I believe, Lindsay, we've talked before, haven't we, actually, I think?
Yes, we have, Alan, and I think I might have actually asked you this question before, but basically, Catherine was aged 11, died at her home, 25 Wall Street, but I just can't find anywhere where she would be buried. And I think I did ask you, I think we discussed it over emails, but I'm just still trying to find out a bit more, about her family, really,
Of course. I guess I'll just double check. It's my file here. I guess it's a good time to bring up the fact that with all these people that were killed, there's a significant portion of people that they simply don't know who is in the mass graves. There are two mass graves. There's one at Milton Cemetery, and that was for anybody who had religious effects of Roman Catholic faith, so of crucifix or rosary beads. And there's, unfortunately, the records for that aren't great. It doesn't actually, there's no clues that say there's no records to say how many people are in it, or there's no record to say where those remains are found and whatnot. Whereas the difference is for the much larger mass grave at Belfast City Cemetery. Initially, originally there were 197 coffins put in. I don't know if it's just because of it was a municipal cemetery, a public cemetery, but the records are a lot better, a lot more in detail. So on those in the Braille records for that mass grave to the cemetery, it states maybe where the remains were found. It might state what is in the coffin, and some of it it's not pleasant reading. A lot of it, some of it might say, you know, burnt body, or might say remains, or it might say hand. It might give an indication of the age of the person, the gender of the person, and it's a bit like the way I look at the Blitz, and it's like a big research puzzle almost. Like there's 1,000 individual pieces. I'm trying to put them all together, and it's as I mentioned, it's the confusion and the chaos after the raid. It just simply might not be possible. I will just double check just in case. Macaulay. You said she was in Wall Street. She lived at. Let's see. What I'll do is, Lindsay, I will email you again, and I'll see, and I'll come back to you separately. But I do have your email, so I will email you again. Again, there's, as I mentioned, this is going out live on Facebook. There's some comments again about my mother's next door neighbor was killed, and it's amazing. Like, there is still a lot of people have, even though people might not have a direct link to this, there is still that story. That story's been passed down to people about, you know, my neighbor was killed, or again, I came across a story last night about a film star in the 50s who came back to Belfast, and she had lost her godmother was actually survived the Blitz in Eglinton Street actually, and her son survived it, but her son's friend who was sheltering with her died. And again, it's never a story I've seen before, but she came back as well. Dawn has asked about a parachute bomb be less accurate. Yes, it's exactly it. A parachute bomb or parachute mine is less accurate. It is totally at the whim of the wind, and that is ultimately maybe a reason why it's such a large loss of life. So the Belfast theory is that Belfast is targeted because of its shipyards, its heavy industries, its aircraft factories. So if we give the Luftwaffe the benefit of the doubt, that's what they're aiming at. But there was also a very heavily populated area around that in North Belfast, on the Shore Road, on East Belfast. And yeah, that's one theory as to why those bombs then landed where they did and not on what was their perceived targets. That's just one of the theories. All theories is the waterworks and how they confused the waterworks for the shape of the basins in the docks. But it's a very good point that it would be much less accurate rather than sighted bomb. Laura, yes, the mass grave at Miltown Cemetery. So Miltown Cemetery is just, because I know you were at the Belfast City Cemetery a few weeks ago. Miltown Cemetery is a little bit further on up the Falls Road on the left-hand side, and it's down the hill towards the Bog Meadows. The mass grave is right at the very, very bottom. What I'll do, Laura, I will email you before I leave with a map of the cemetery and just highlight where that mass grave is. But it's not too hard to find, thankfully. Sandra, I guess it's entirely. I'm trying to be diplomatic here. I guess it's up to Belfast City Cemetery or Belfast City Council and the cemetery's manager. Personally, the way I view it is that the cemetery's plot, it was bought on behalf of the council, and those graves are held in trust for people, for the public. I'm sure the reason how I guess you've got to ask the question, Sandra, to the Belfast City Council, the cemetery's manager, and see what they would say. I know maybe they might be a bit reluctant as well, just because there's some data protection elements to it about people who on the grave, people whose families might still be alive. But personally, I think that it should be available. But it's a question I couldn't answer definitively. You'd have to ask Belfast City Cemetery, and if they're not, it's again that's a question for Belfast City Council and why they're not available to the public. Again, if any other questions or discussions, I'll give a couple more seconds. Again, I just want to highlight that this is the last in the series of our talks. If you've missed anything and you want to go back and watch them, they will be available on our Facebook page as well as on our YouTube channel. as well. I don't see anybody typing, so I think what we'll do is we will call it there. Again, if you want to ask me a question, you've got my email as on the screen, as well as my phone number. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a pleasant evening.